Hello there, my name is Phil Treseder and I'm the Education Officer at Swansea Museum. And this is the fourth in a series of talks brought to you by Swansea Museum, which is part of City and County of Swansea, and Fusion, a Welsh Government cultural initiative. This talk is called Carry On Collecting, and if you haven't seen the third talk in the series, The History and Treasures of Swansea Museum, you might be better off watching that talk first. Despite Dylan Thomas's quip about Swansea Museum being a museum that belongs in a museum, it might surprise people to learn that we still actually collect objects. We take in a few hundred objects per year. And being the oldest museum in Wales, we have quite a considerable collection. In 1991, the museum passed control from the founding organisation, the Royal Institution of South Wales, over to the City and County of Swansea. So this is just to illustrate some of the kinds of objects that we still collect and how a museum, I suppose, looks at collecting today. So just as a bit of a recap from the last one, it was just an example of the kind of weird things that used to be collected. Now this is just from the donation book, a very 1835 actually, from the first year. We see things like Cyclops monstrosity of chickens, or some one-eyed chicken, a scorpion from Cuba. Now, the collecting policy is a bit different these days. None of these donations were actually kept. They were just studied and thrown away. So if you're a farmer and you've come across a very interesting sort of looking chicken that's been born, please don't bring it in. And we wouldn't collect something like a scorpion from Cuba because the collecting policy now is that it's got to have a direct link with Swansea. So just as an example, we have a number of objects in the collection, and I think just a reminder again, a random selection would be 101 bottles. We have 6 chamber pots, 13 ashtrays, 110 items of medical equipment, 6 rolling pins, 45 floor tiles, and 48 items of underwear. So we still collect. I finished the last talk with illustrating something that many people would have in their house today, or if they don't have one, they certainly, their parents or grandparents might have one, and it's a biscuit barrel. If you were to bring in a biscuit barrel to us and say, would you like this? We'd probably say, that's very kind of you to offer, but we've already got a few samples of biscuit barrels in the collection. We'd probably politely decline, unless your biscuit barrel come with some incredible story, like one of your grandparents was one of the great train robbers and this is where he kept the money. Then we're probably going to say, oh yes, please. However, we might still take it off your hands, and the reason for that is that we also have what we call handling collections. So as the education officer, I've got about 3,000 objects in the education room, which are handling objects that the children can hold, feel, touch, etc. We also have handling objects which go out in memory boxes to residential units, very good for dementia therapy. So if you're not fussy about the fact that it wouldn't go into the museum collection and be kept safe forevermore, then we might still take that off your hands. So we still carry on collecting, and obviously some of it is old stuff. For example, this is a spearhead that's been found on Swansea Bay. It's late Bronze Age, and it's an example of an object that's been funded through a grant. So this was something called Saving Treasures Programme, which was a HLF Heritage Lottery Fund programme. We purchased a series of objects from metal detectors. Sometimes it's exhibitions. Recently, this is a music exhibition in Swansea Museum that was up in 2019 and came down early 2020. Most of the exhibition you see here, same with, if you remember, the First World War exhibition, most of these are loans. They come into the museum, they go on exhibition, and they go back to whoever owns them. Sometimes there are a few things that are donated. So, for example, this is a ticket for the Ladles, who were playing in Swansea University Students' Union back in 1990. We also have other objects related to key historic periods. So, for example, this photograph, we have a series of photographs of the Swansea Battalion, of the Swansea Pals. This is the First World War. This is a picture of Towie, and he's the battalion's mascot. And this is a photograph of him. We have a series of photographs of the Swansea Battalion up in Rill on their training exercises. Another example of objects donated as a result of exhibitions is what I prefer, cats rather than dogs. And this is an Aweni pottery cat, roughly circa 1900. This was linked to an exhibition that we had, which was commemorating the Aweni pottery, which is still running and is up near Bridgend, and this was held in 2013. And also as part of that exhibition, we had a new wassailing bowl and cover donated. This is like a punch bowl, and on the top there you've got Lizzie the elephant. If you go back to the History and Treasures of Swansea Museum, you will find out about Lizzie the elephant there. And of course, another significant period of Swansea history is the Second World War. We recently come across a photograph album, including some photographs we haven't seen before. This just one shows a crater outside the Brangwyn Hall. The Guild Hall is one of the few Grade 1 listed buildings in Swansea, and in this photograph you can see that actually it was a close run thing for that building as well. Another interesting thing that's come in quite recently from a family, this Flight Sergeant Marcus Harris was in the RAF during the Second World War. He was from Trevorth. The family donated again about probably 30 to 40 items, including photographs, and this I find particularly interesting. It's a membership card for a fairly exclusive club. He was a member of the Goldfish Club, and to be a member of the Goldfish Club involved an airman ditching in the sea and surviving, so a fairly exclusive club. Another example that's come in recently, which I find really interesting, is the operational orders for Operation Neptune. Now, Neptune is the naval part of Overlord, so D-Day, and there were about 5,000 ships involved in D-Day, and they were each given a set of orders and instructions to follow, and they run to about 200 pages, and they're all stamped top secret, as you can see on the top left hand corner. And then if you look at the bottom, interestingly it says to be taken on charge in accordance with Article 39 of CB Form U2D and destroyed by fire on completion of the operation. So these orders are probably quite rare. The reason they survived probably was this was from a tank landing ship which ran into mechanical problems and ended up having to go back. So it didn't actually deliver its tanks until a few days after D-Day. So this is why this probably has survived. Most of these, well, they would have been burnt as instructed. Another significant memory for a lot of people in Swansea is the Mumbles Railway, and we've got a few of these, a set of seats out of one of the tram cars. And something that's just come in recently is the electric plans. So these are the electric plans for electrifying the railway in 1929. So this is section 1, so the electric poles 1 to 46. So you're running down Oystermouth Road here, you can see just about in the middle there, it's just placing you where the Swansea Jail is, and just over to the left, as many people will remember, you can see the gasworks, which of course now is the site of Tesco's. And also just another example, and this is a photograph from an album, and it's the wake for the Mumbles Railway. And when they closed it, they had a sort of wake, and they took a false coffin to represent the Mumbles Railway and carrying it from Oystermouth down to Mumbles. These are some copper ladles, smelting ladles that come out of the ground in Havard. And many people will recognise these if you're observant, particularly when you walk around Havard, Landau area. And just in case you're thinking, well, what is it? Where have I seen one of those? You'll have seen them on tops of walls. If you go down Neath Road through Harvard, have a look at the garden walls. These are the copper slag runoffs, and they would be turned into capstones for walls. Bit of reminiscing, of course. Things that we kind of like to fondly remember that we have in the collection. You've got old £1 note, telephone from the 1960s. Apparently there's quite a funny film on YouTube, I'm told, where you've got a couple of teenagers trying to work out how this would have worked, trying to swipe it and press the numbers, etc. They'd probably struggle to work this as well these days. This is an early Amstrad computer that we have in the collection. Fridges look a bit different these days. This is an early fridge again that we have. This is a funeral beer. Again, probably not something you see very often these days. This would be used for carrying the coffin in at funerals. So the coffin would be placed on this, and then they'd carry it into the church. This is actually from Catholic Church in Portynan, which has survived quite well and recently come into the collection about 2 years ago. Something else we don't see much of these days is your good old second-hand bookshop, and this is a picture of Ralph Wishart sitting in his second-hand bookshop on Dilwyn Street in 1966. I used to love going in there myself when I was younger. And memories as well of some of the kind of venues that we would have gone to in the past. This is a selection of matchstick boxes that a friend's mother of mine collected, and she just started collecting them in the 1960s and 70s purely because they were free. A couple of different venues there, from Swan's Kingsway Casino, which is gone, Arabella Casino, that's gone. I think possibly the two survivors there are the Dragon Hotel and the Grand Hotel. Something we don't see on the roads anymore. This is a steam road roller manufactured between 1913 and 16, and was in the playground outside Bishopston Community Centre before being moved to Swansea Museum. An old British motorbike. We have about, I think, 10 or 11 motorbikes and scooters in the collection. And some other old transport as well, the Llinvi bus and the Ford lorry. Llinvi bus now is currently on loan up at the Bus Museum in Llansamlet. And women conductors, a photograph taken in 1919, so these when Swansea still had trams, so they were tramway conductors, and well, we don't see conductors anymore. And a roller coaster car. Now this originally was a figure-of-8 roller coaster which was at Mumbles, and it was there from 1908 to 1920, and then they transferred it up to Coney Beach at Porthcawl, but we still have one of the actual original roller coaster cars. We've also got some significant boats in the collection, and this is a photograph that we have in the collection. It's a photograph of Zelva. Now this is an 8-metre racing yacht. Now the boat unfortunately needs restoration, and probably not the best economic times for that, but significantly this, as I've been undertaking some research, is the oldest 8-metre Edwardian racing yacht in Britain and possibly the world. There's another 8-metre racing yacht up in Scandinavia from the same year, 1907. One day, I hope to see this back in the water. We also have to think about what represents culture and things in more recent times. So this is an example of something that's come in from 1990s, maybe around about 2000, and it's a come-down kit. And it was sold as a smart legal drug for clubbers, and whether people like it or not, the rave scene and the illegal drug scene was very very prominent for people who were in their 20s, 30s at that point. So, we have to look at collecting objects that represent the scene as we do in terms of the 60s. This is something, again, that's come into the museum quite recently. We also have to think about things like, how society has changed. So this poster was a homemade poster. It's an anti-apartheid poster from 1969 when the Springboks toured the UK and there was a game at St Helens and there was a huge demonstration. When the museum does reopen, we'll be looking at an exhibition on change makers. So looking at people who have campaigned, so that could be anti-apartheid, could be the environment and Extinction Rebellion. Another good example might be, we'll be looking for, somebody who's taken part in the Black Lives Matter protest recently and try and get one of the placards, etc. So we'll be looking at an exhibition on that, but we'll also be looking to try and collect objects as well related to society changing. On the same note, we have to think about as well how we represent sort of, newer communities of Swansea and other communities like, the LGBT community. For example, we have the wedding vows from one of the first gay couples to marry in the UK when the law changed. And this was the wedding vows for Federico and Darren, who got married at the registry office in Swansea. And of course we find ourselves in interesting, strange times. So this is not a modern face mask, it's an old face mask. It's not something that's been on display probably for many years, but now we've got COVID-19, and although it's a tragedy, it's also going to be seen as an historic period at some point in the future. So, we will be looking to collect some objects to represent what's happened over the last several months. We also have a number of other objects in the collection, as I mentioned at the start. I think we have about 110 sort of instruments, medical instruments. And some of those, for example, are from gynecologists in the 1950s, which, when you look at some of the equipment, you have to say, "Ooh, that looks scary." And we also have, quite a number of objects that are just curious, really, on the subject of medical equipment. This actually is one of them. It's a Clark's electrical shock machine, and this was advertised as helping with the treatment of rheumatism, headaches, piles or muscle problems. A quick warning for the children, please don't try this at home. And things like this. This is a child's shoe, and it was found during renovations of a house in Clydach, and this had been placed above a doorway. And this is kind of related to a sort of idea that goes way back about having things like sort of children's shoes. Sometimes you might find a skeleton of a cat above a doorway or a window, and it was to ward off evil spirits. This shoe came out of a wall during sort of renovations of a house in Clydach. Also, as I said in the previous talk about the history and treasures of Swansea Museum, maybe the most iconic object in the museum is Ho the Mummy, where he's having a bit of competition these days about who's the most iconic object, and the competition's coming from this guy. You probably may have recognised him from when you used to walk into the quadrant from the St Mary's entrance and looked up, and the Swansea Devil was in the window up there. Well, the conditions you were being kept in meant that he needed to be moved for safekeeping, so he's now been moved to Swansea Museum, just in case you were wondering where he's gone. And this is him in his new spot. He's in the corridor downstairs, and of course he's still facing St Mary's. You can't see St Mary's, but he's facing St Mary's. And you're probably aware of the story whereby an architect bid for the work of extending St Mary's in the 1890s, didn't get it, and apparently had this devil carved and placed on a building he owned opposite St Mary's Church, with this prediction that one day his Swansea Devil would watch St Mary's burn, which of course is exactly what happened in February 1941. So we'll finish with him. What we'll be looking at in the fifth and final talk is that story about the Swansea Devil. We'll be looking at that in detail, seeing what the research is that we've done, and trying to come to a conclusion about, is the story true or is it an urban myth? Tune in a few weeks' time to find out more. Thank you for listening.